Hey love, and welcome back to my channel. And for those of you who are new, welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy to have you. In this video, I am going to talk about retightening, specifically interlock retightening. Okay, so here's what you should know about interlocking retightενings. And I do want to let you know in advance that there will be a part 2 to this retightening video. So be on the lookout and we will go into some of the myths that you hear about retightенings, specifically interlock retightенings, okay? Okay, so first thing is, every loctician has their own retightening system. Some may just throw your hair up in a ponytail, pull one lock at a time and start retightening. Some may section it out and part a line and put clips and start retightening one by one, but keeping a row. Some may use clips, some may not. It all depends. At the end of the day, the lock is still getting locked, but everyone has their own retightening system. So some locks, some reties may look different than others. Some may look cleaner than others, depending on the system that they use. Some locks may look more frizzy than others, depending on the system that they use. So it all depends, but every loctician has their own retightening system. So yeah. Okay, another thing is that retightενings can be done on wet or dry locks. I personally prefer my hair to be tightened when it's damp. It doesn't have to be drenching wet, but I like it a little bit damp because when the hair is wet, it's easier to separate. It's less painful when you're trying to move the hairs and strands out of the way. But you can also do it dry. I have some clients that I do dry and I have some clients that I do wet. It all depends. But if a client is having some, if it hurts to separate because they haven't had a retightening in a long time, please damp that hair so it's not too painful on them. But keep in mind, if you are retightening hair when it's wet, be mindful of tension because when the hair is wet, it stretches a little bit. So you think you might have more and more room to tighten, but then you end up doing it too tight. It might not be tight when the client is getting it done, but when that client goes home and that hair dries up in that lock and it starts pulling in that tension, yeah, so be mindful of that, okay? Which leads me to the next tip is that hair should not be tightened too tight to the scalp. You want to be mindful of tension. So if you are the client and you feel like it's too tight, please speak up. If you are the loctician, if you see the hair is pulling too much from the scalp, if the client is complaining about soreness 5 days later or anything like that, it is too tight. So ease up on your tension because inner locks that are tightened too tightly over time will cause the hair to break off and thin out. So we want to be mindful of the not using too much tension. Another thing to consider is I've had some people on my live ask me about, should their scalp be bleeding? Your scalp should not be bleeding when you are getting a retightening. If your scalp is bleeding, oh my goodness, inquire, because something might be going on. Now, if the person is separating and a strand is pulled and that strand of hair is pulled completely out and you have a little spot that bleeds, that's fine. But for your scalp to be constantly bleeding or anything like that, that is not okay. And please, inquire. Also, if you get a retightening and you have to go home and take medicine, Tylenol, whatever it is to stop a headache or to stop the pain, please speak up. It is too tight. It should not be so tight that you need to go home and take medication for your locks, okay? For your head, for you to have some type of level of comfort. If it is too tight, say something. And loctician as well, if your client says, I have to take some medicine or something when I go home, then say something. Now, some people are just naturally tender-headed and they will take that medicine before they get to that appointment. To avoid any type of pain or discomfort during the retightening session, that is fine because I do have some tender-headed clients. And I mean, when I say tender-headed, you touch their scalp and they're like, oh, So if you're that type of client, yeah, you can take some, Tylenol, whatever it is that's going to ease that pain before you get that retightening so you're not in too much pain. By all means, do what you have to do so you can withstand that retightening and be okay. And when I do have clients who are tender-headed, I'm extra gentle, but even with that gentleness, some people still need to take some medicine to help with that. Also, be mindful and extremely gentle with people who've had head trauma. There are people who've had surgery, brain surgery, or scars from surgery or scars from other injuries. You've had people who've been knocked upside the head. Different things have happened that to create injury or some type of trauma. So it leaves that area very sensitive, very sensitive to touch. It's just really tender. So be mindful if you have clients like that, because you have to be extra gentle, because they're not just saying, oh, I'm tender headed. That area is just tender. Because I have some clients where their whole head is fine, but I get to one spot and it's extremely tender. And the more I talk to them, I'm like, oh, okay, this person has had trauma. One of my clients, she's had brain surgery, so she has a scar. So that area is always sensitive for her. Another client shared some, some deep stuff with me, and I'm like, oh, okay, that explained the tender spot you have right here. So be mindful of that when you do have clients who've had trauma, okay, head trauma, because that is they're not faking. They literally have it's sensitive, it hurts, and it's just not pleasant. So be mindful and be extra tender with them. The next one, I get asked a lot, how long can you go in between retightenings? And I always tell people it is based on the size of your locks. And when I'm talking about the size, I'm talking about the parting size. People with smaller locks can go maybe 4 to 6 weeks. People with larger locks can go longer. So it all depends on the size of your locks that will determine how long you can go in between retightenings. And talk to your loctician about the time frame, about how often you can go. That is something between you and your consultant. But from my experience with my clients, the smaller their locks are, the more often they have to come. The larger their locks are, as far as the parting size, the less often they have to come. I have some clients who come every 4 weeks, and I have some clients who come every 3 months. So it all depends on the size of the locks, okay? Another thing I've noticed with retightenings is that longer locks takes longer to retighten. Yes, you can find some tricks and tips and ways to shorten up that retightening time, but in general, longer locks, even with the tips and the tricks and the icks and whatever it is, will take longer to retighten than someone with shorter hair. I've also noticed that people with thicker locks have a shorter retightening time than someone with very fine, skinny locks. So that's something to keep in mind. People with frizzy hair or hair that grows outside of the lock, that is going to take more time to retighten than someone with everything intact. That hair has to be wrapped. We have to figure out something to do with that hair. So because of that, it does take more time to retighten. The next thing on this list is repairs. Repairs, baby. When it comes to repairs, that is a separate appointment. Some people expect retightening, repairs, and all that stuff to be done in one sitting. Now, a repair can be done with a retightening. It can be done all in one sitting, but that is if the loctician is already aware that repairs need to be done. But if the loctician is expecting to do a retightening and you are scheduled for just a retightening and you come with repairs and all this other stuff, that is going to be a separate appointment because that loctician does not have the allotted time to do all this extra service. Some of you guys know you have repairs that need to be done in advance. And if that's the case, if you are aware a repair is needed, make sure that you're booking the appropriate time for that. You're booking enough time for a retightening and repairs, or letting your loctician know, hey, I know we normally do our reties in 3 hours, but I have some repairs that needs to be done. Can additional time be added, or can we just do a separate appointment? Either or, we will take care of it. But if your loctician is not aware that repairs need to be done and they don't have time to do a repair during your retightening session, they'll let you know to schedule another appointment or something. But there are some repairs that has to be done during the retightening session, and that is slippage. If you have slippage at the root, and when I say slippage, I'm talking about slippage at the root. If you have slippage at the root, it is automatically going to be taken care of with the retightening. But if you have slippage in the middle of your lock, it may be taken care of during the retightening if there's time for it, but that might be a separate appointment. If you have slippage on the ends of your lock, that might be a separate appointment. If the loctician has time for it, they can do it all in one sitting. But some repairs, depending on the extent of the repairs, that is a separate appointment. I know some people feel like, oh, my loctician ain't doing this, ain't doing that, whatever. You know, if you need more time, you have to schedule the time for it and make your loctician aware of what you need, okay? And yes, your loctician knows. And if they're not doing it during the retightening, it might not be important enough to do it. Some repairs or some issues that you may have resolves itself. But some has to be, have to be taken care of, and we do what we got to do, okay? So stay around for part 2 because we got more to talk about for myths and all this other stuff. So see you in part 2.